We've got a record registration again. As many of you know, we alternate between our webinars as we go through the months. We run one for our teachers, and then next month we run a webinar with our school leaders in mind. And this one is a school leadership webinar, and we've had a record number of people register. More than 70 people have decided that this is a webinar that they want to know about. And I guess sometimes I'm surprised by the webinar numbers and how many people are really catching on to, I guess, this way of doing a little bit of professional learning, and sometimes I'm not. And I guess this time I'm not surprised. The decision to run this webinar came very directly out of some recent conversations that I've had with people, and most school leaders that I've been talking to around what they're looking for have been telling me that they would like to be able to move on from this whole punishment concept, about, I guess, the model for punishment, the adversarial or the blame-based approach that we've been adopting in Australian schools for, I don't know, about 200 years or so. They would like to move on, but there's some key things that are anchoring that change, and that change being able to both be initiated and then I guess also the implementation of a new model. And they tell me that there are three things that are sticking out. One is that one is that the defaults of our staff members, and indeed including ourselves as staff members, there is an interesting one, and it's something that stops us from getting things right. That we can do things really well in our staffs, and we can actually get people on board and get things changed. But if there is a cohort of people in our staff who don't want to change, or if there's a cohort of people in our staff who are happy to change unless it gets to a certain point, and then some old defaults creep in, then we find ourselves undoing a lot of the good work that we were wishing to get done. The second reason that people tell me that it's difficult to move beyond punishment is because of pressure from parents. That even a fantastic new model, well presented in a day of professional learning or something like that, is very difficult to implement in a school because of the pressure that comes from parents to get very focused on outcome, who would like to compare outcomes, in fact, and they might even have the old scenario of, well, how come my kid got 2 detentions now when I've got a record here of my friend's brother who had a kid at your school 5 years ago who did something similar and he only got 1 detention. What's going on? This isn't fair. You've all completely lost your minds. And it's a really challenging one to bring our parents with us on this trip. And in fact, while I won't sort of dwell too much on that issue today, I will say that any school that's looking to shift model out of a punitive model into a more productive or relational model is going to need to not have a communication plan for its parents. They're going to need an over-communication plan. So we're going to need to obsess over how we can get this information to our parents. And I guess the other thing that people tell me is a real challenge in trying to change model in their school is restrictions or expectations that come from above. That schools are that they feel that more than but most of the time they have really strong autonomy as school leaders in their school. They can make local decisions unless it gets really bad, and then we might get pressure from above to bend to a certain loud parent or to media pressure and things like that, and that's stopping them from making the steps that they need to into a really effective change process. I understand all the. And I certainly, as a school leader, have felt those pressures from time to time. And I guess what I want to do today is to put in place the building blocks that will allow us to change a little bit of our own thinking around that, and also that will allow us to, I guess, put the platform in place that will allow some strong local change to have a chance of succeeding. I guess to take you behind the curtain a little bit today about this. Firstly, everybody is arriving for various reasons, and the one that I kept hearing about was the one I mentioned there around a little bit of helplessness in how we get to how we can change this. But I come to this webinar today determined that first of all is to point out some of the mistakes that we've been making in this space, to get really clear about the controllables in our own school environment that we can actually start to work towards if the leaders are prepared to sit down and think, and then actually take strategy that allows that thinking to become a reality. I want to look at the critical considerations that you should make once you have made the decision to abandon punitive responses in our schools and to move forward. So I've got three blunders, 3 mistakes that we've been making, and I've got 5 critical considerations as we move forward. And then what I also want to do is to give you the headspace and give you some impetus for your thinking around change management, and I guess specifically how it applies to schools. You know, I think that there are plenty of change programs that you can get your hands on out there that can, you know, give you the 7 effective habits of change managers, but very few of them have been designed with schools in mind. So I want to give you 3 categories of change that we need to think very strongly about when we're looking to get a change to happen in our schools. The first, I guess, piece of the first piece that I would like us to work with is that I believe that the key reason that we've not made a successful fist of moving from a punitive model to one other model is that we've lacked to establish a really clear why for people. We haven't actually built and defined, or I guess established, a significant enough why for people. You would think that when we're talking about the problems that come from the punitive model and the disengagement of our parents with our schools, the increased rates of suspension in our schools, you would think that the increased teacher stress issues that always, nearly all of the studies that we can look into tell us that student behaviour is at the core of it. You would think that that would be pain enough, but sadly it seems that it isn't. And so when we come up with a new program, what we need to do, or a new approach that we want to implement in our schools, one of the problems that we have is around implementation. We leap very quickly to the how and the what of that program, and we forget to establish with people the why. You know, what's their deep reason for buying heavily into this program? And that's the crux of this here, is that we need people in our schools to actually buy heavily into the notion of a changing model. And without their heavy buy-in and without them having a strong level of commitment to working differently, we know that there is a ceiling on our implementation journey. We'll only get so far. And the key, and I would actually contend that this is a problem for us in classrooms as well, that far too often we're telling students what they need to learn and how they need to learn it, but we're not actually pausing to tell them why learning how to conjugate verbs or learning about calculus is a particularly important thing for them to stick their heads into. And a really fabulous TED talk that I know many of you will be familiar with is not a bad idea when you're looking to establish why, and it's a fabulous TED talk by a guy called Simon Sinek, who encourages to start with why, and he pulled apart the Apple sales model, and he said that why is it that Apple were able to do such an incredible job with technology and basically take over the world when it came to technology? What was that all about? Where did that come from? And Apple's sales model is 3 circles that just sort of get smaller or bigger as they go out. So 3 circles. And Apple says that the reason that they've been able to take over the world is because their sales model starts with why. The little circle in the middle is why. Whereas every other technology seller, up to the point where Apple started doing this, were telling us what. So we know this because all of you have perhaps received a phone call from someone with a subcontinental accent at around 6:30 p.m. in the evening who would like to sell you a computer. And I ask any of you now that if you would like to, there's a hand up button available to you. If you'd like to put your hand up and let me know if you've actually bought one, that'd be great. I'd really like to have a conversation with you about perhaps why you made that choice. And the truth is that almost no one here, I'm pretty confident of saying that no one here has bought a computer from the person who rings them at 6:30 in the evening and disrupts their dinner. And the reason is why? Why would we do that? Why would we bother to buy a computer from someone who's decided that the best way to sell it is to ring us up at the most inconvenient time? Apple said we're going to actually start with why, and they said that we're actually not even going to, in our advertisements, show you the technology. We're just going to show people enjoying their life and being able to access it and converge it through the technology that we provide. And so the why for Apple is around things like we would like technology to enhance people's lives and make it easier and make it easier for them to enjoy themselves and be happy. How we're going to do it is we're going to bring together some really creative people and put no restrictions on what sort of devices and what the uptake might be on those devices. And what we're going to do is we're going to sell some computers and some phones and some iPads. Do you want one? And once that why has been established, we are far more likely to buy. and people buy quite emotionally. And so what we want to do is to establish that heavy buy-in by connecting the work that we're doing to some deeply held beliefs and establish people's buy-in at a really, really high level. So even our webinar today will be very much around what are the big building blocks that as leaders we need to get in place conceptually so that local implementation and strategy has a chance to succeed. So all right, that's I guess the intro, what we're trying to achieve today. What I would like to do also at this point is get very clear about, I'm mindful that we always, with all of these webinars, have new people in the room. So I want to get really clear about what's available to you on the control panel that you have there. So you've got a hand up function, which means that at any time during the webinar today, you can stick your hand up just like you're in a classroom. And you can ask a question, and I want to encourage you to do that. When leaders come together in a space like this, it's actually important that you're able to, conceptually make sense and contextualize the key points that I'm making. So if you would like to ask a question, please put your hand up. If you're feeling a little bit shy, there is a question box. And so I want to point that out to you as well, that if you go to the question box, you can actually ask a question in there. And while I will do my level best to keep an eye on that question box, I want to also make it really clear that I will return to those questions at the end and see if there's any key things that we need to cover in there. And I want to let you know also that we're recording the webinar today, for not only for people who couldn't make it along today, but for the who registered that couldn't get here. They've got some time zone issues, but also for our member schools. So if you're a member school, and we're going to pop this webinar within the next 48 hours or so in the member section of our website, and you'll have that available to you. If you are having any technical difficulties or anything like that, we have the wonderful Chris Ennebrad, who's our business manager, who's sitting in the background today. So if you go to that question box, if you're having any problems there and it's a technical question, Chris will do her absolute best to get you back online and have everything working and functioning the way a webinar should. And if it's about the content that we're doing today, obviously, that's my bag. That's what I need to do. Okay, so let's get clear on who's in the room today. I want to know, where do you see things from? What's your perspective for the way that for your opportunity, I guess, to be able to change? And I also want to know what it is that your role is, and I also want to know, I guess, what your capacity is to be able to change things in your school. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. And what this poll is asking us is, what's your perspective of this? So I'm trying to find out today, do we have principals or system leaders in the room? We've got people in the AP role who have come along today. People who are in that senior or leading teacher role. Like, I really want to know from you guys, if you're in the room today, people who are teaching but aspiring into leadership. And then I also want to know if we have any classroom teachers or even specialists or homeroom teachers who are in the space today, because I want to be able to definitely tailor my delivery and even some of the content that I'll present today. I want to be able to tailor it really effectively. So I'm just looking to spend maybe 10 seconds more. I'd like to be able to get the percentage voted up over 80 of you that have actually gone and grabbed a mouse and given it a bit of a click, and we've managed it now. So what I'm going to do is close that poll. I'm going to share the results, and what you can see there is that we have about 40% of our people that are here today are in that assistant principal or even system leadership role, and we have, I guess, a cohort there that adds up to 55% that is around that senior teacher, aspiring teacher, and teacher level. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to keep that in mind. That lets me know that I've got a very even spread of people today. I'll just hide those results for just a moment and head back into our webinar. And then the next thing I want to do in getting my head around making sure that I hit the mark today is to find out what demons you're fighting. So what is the biggest problem that you're facing as you're heading into or considering a really extensive and really critical and really fundamental model change here in moving away from the punitive model. So I want to launch another poll here and ask you, which of these best sums up your motivation for being here today? Is it that lack of staff confidence to move away from punishment? They want to do it, but they don't know how. They're feeling unsupported in that. Is it the parent criticism stuff? The expectations that come from parents is the thing that's stopping you from moving forward? Is it identifying what we do if we stop punishing? Is it having a model that actually replaces it? Would you say that it's proving the effectiveness of any alternative model, or are we just acting on a little bit of a whim here? Or would you say that that I really would like to do it, but it seems so enormous that I'm not quite sure how to manage such a significant change management process. So I want you to give a little bit of thought there to what it is that's motivating you, I guess, the most. Which one of those jumps off the page most significantly to you? And then I certainly am going to keep that in mind as I go forward too. I'd like today to be a bit flexible in that what I'd like to do is to be able to give you some, some of those key conceptual blocks. But if I see a theme coming through here, this gives me an opportunity to provide some advice as well. So just a few more seconds here, guys, to get those votes in. We're up into the 70% now. There are a couple of other people who can give us their vote. That'd be fantastic. Close, and probably close enough. So I'm going to close that poll there and share those results with you, and I can see a significant theme here, and that is how can I identify that strong alternative to punishment? If we're not going to punish, what is it that we're going to do? What are we going to hang our hat on? So I can see that coming very strongly through there, and so I'm going to definitely keep that in mind as we move forward here. There's a couple of suggestions I want to be able to make to you. Hide those results, head back into the webinar. All right, I think we've got things under control. All right, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to work out exactly what it is that your motivation is for being here today. All right, I want to talk to, first of all, I guess, those three key mistakes that I believe we make. And number one, from a leadership point of view, is a failure to sell the vision. It's a failure to actually let people know that this doesn't come from a deficit model. But what we're talking about here is actually saying that, some of the stuff you've been doing, considering it's just sort of, operating off the good person theory, that you'll do good stuff because you're a good person, that some of the stuff we've been doing in schools is actually really valuable. And we'd like to build upon that, and we'd like to actually get to a really fantastic place. And it's up to us as leaders to make sure that people can see what that fantastic place is. Your staff need to know two things from you. And like I said before, that we all, any good salesman will tell you that that people buy emotionally. So what we're doing here is tapping into their deep emotional beliefs for why they work with young people. But our staff will want to know two things from any change management process around student behaviour. Number one is that they're going to want to know that it will make them more effective. They're going to want to know that it will allow them to meet accountabilities and to build confidence in their ability, in their capacity to meet mounting capabilities and accountabilities. They're going to know that this will help them do that. They're not going to want to feel like this is more to do. They're going to want to feel that this is a better way to do it. So we need to always make sure that we don't position any change process here as additional work, but it's just a different way to go about things. We also want to let them know that it will stress them less. We actually, every study over about the last 30 years around teacher stress tells us that student behaviours at the highest level is the thing that keeps teachers awake at night. I rail against that a little bit because I actually don't think it's the behaviour that day that keeps teachers awake at night. I think that it's the absence of a plan that will be any better tomorrow. And so when we put a strong plan in place, associated and paralleled by a great vision, for this wonderful school environment that they're going to be able to be immersed in, what we do is we reduce their stress, and when we do that we get spikes in creativity and we get spikes in their own personal well-being, which means their capacity is maintained. They actually get better sleep at night. So what we need to do before we move forward in any change management process is we are definitely going to need to sell the educational tahiti that they need to get to, and it's one of the problems that we have is that we often fail to tell them where it is that we're hoping to get to in the end and how fantastic that's going to be when we get there. We've too much on this is what needs to change first and this is what the problems are. We need to step out of that deficit model and start selling a really fantastic future to our people. The second mistake that I would contend that we make is a failure to scaffold the change. So what that means is, I guess when we talk about, I often refer to school leaders having superpowers and that they have kryptonite, and I know that my superpower is back to the first mistake. I am great at selling the vision. I can let people know this is going to be fantastic. You guys are going to be so excited. How awesome is this going to be when we get everybody involved and we've got suspension rates down and we've got student behaviour infractions down and we've got engagement levels up and student learning's going through the roof and parent perception data is all of a sudden improving and our NAPLAN stuff's even kicking up and so is our attendance. People go, wow, that sounds incredible, and everything like that. And then I leave the room. And one of the big mistakes that I often make is the failure to scaffold what people need to do not only first, but next. So people want to know from me what it is that they're going to do moving forward. And so what I need to do to make really clear is if we are going to implement a significant model shift, I need to make it really clear what that model is. So as an example, to the people who are saying they're looking to identify a strong alternative to punishment, I guess one of the, and that was 58% of the people in the room today, what the strong alternative to punishment I would suggest to you would be something like restorative practices. And I would say that even some of the programs that you can bring into your school, and you probably know what some of the big brand programs are out there that are getting a really fantastic run in school with posters and keys and things like that. I would say they're merely contributing to the overall function of building a really successful school culture that a program like Restorative Practices can provide. So while I think that's an awesome program, it takes a significant structure for people to understand how we're going to implement. And that implementation and the steps into that structure aren't the same for every single person. So what we need to do is to provide multiple entry points for people. So what I mean by that, I guess, is if I use restorative practices as an example here, I always say that in restorative practices there are two key no-brainers. Number one is using effective statements, which is basically just say what you always say when you correct a behaviour, but chuck in a feelings word. So if you hear someone swear, instead of saying, hey, close your mouth and stop swearing, we would just say, gee, I'm really disappointed to hear your choice of language there. I want you to not speak like that again. And it's the use of that affect that people can just chuck into their language and get better at it. People can have little competitions. You can make posters out of it to keep people on up and going with it. And it's just so easy. It's an entry point that teachers can pick up and run with without having to completely transform everything. The second one around restorative practices is obviously the use of circles. And so teachers can watch one webinar out of our member section, and they could be immediately running some circles in their room. They'll get a few wrong at the start, but then they'll get better and better at it as time goes on. And so there's two really fantastic entry points, and staff can choose them. Why do we want them to have multiple entry points? The reason for that is because it gives us something to thank them for. They've made a choice to jump in at this place, and when they do, and they do a great job, it gives us something to congratulate them for. And what that thanking and congratulating does is it reduces conflict around stepping into the model, and it builds trust. So that's what we're looking for here, and because we often, sometimes like me, my kryptonite is certainly failure to scaffold the change. I get all excited about the vision on the beach, but what I need to do then is the great leadership art of being able to scaffold, finding multiple entry points for people to ensure that all of my people have a place to start. And then I want to put it to you really strongly that one of the third big mistake that I think we make is that we fold under pressure. This is a point that I want to make really strongly. We are the experts on education. Right? The whole notion that we should be bending and folding to people who are not experts on education, and that includes our parents, and it includes media, and sometimes it includes even politicians or system leaders, is insane. It's crazy, and I actually think that it's quite contributing, probably above anything else, to the reduced status of teachers in society. Because we bend every time somebody doesn't like what we're doing, we actually reduce our own position we diminish our own position as experts on education. And we should be the experts. I often give the quite crass gag that just because you've taken a crap doesn't make you a qualified plumber. Using the system does not make you an expert on the system. Working in and on the system makes you an expert on the system, and we need to stand so strongly in that expertise once we find some evidence about what really works. Now, even around implementing that evidence, as I mentioned before, getting parents on side so that they don't apply the kind of pressure that leads us to folding is hugely important. The University of London did a study recently around bullying. And what they found was their top 10. Number one, incidentally, was developing a restorative ethos and culture around your school. But if you head down to number 4 or 5 of what is it that those schools do who are successful in punching above their weight when it comes to bullying, what do? Number 4 is that they have strong school council involvement and support. Number 5 is that they find ways to enable and to mobilise their parent community in support. They get their parents on side. So one of the great ways to avoid folding under pressure is to get to the people who are putting us under pressure. and make sure that they have the opportunity to make sure that they have the opportunity to have their say and to they get the chance to buy in. Okay, really, really important stuff there. I've got your message there, Simon, about speaking a little slower. It's hard to catch what I'm saying. I hear you on that. I think that even after the last webinar, I had some feedback about speaking a little slower. I think I get a little anxious when I'm sitting here in a room on my own and not being able to see the engagement on people's faces. I hear you, Simon. Thank you. I'm going to make sure I take the time and get the message through nice and slowly to you. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is there's three big mistakes, but the next thing is it's really important to look at what it is that we do need to give really strong consideration to as leaders. What I want us to do really carefully is to make sure we do our research before we step into abandoning a punitive model. What I would like us to do is to get really clear on choosing the best model for your school. And what that means is doing a little bit of research. While most programs end up in schools, and I'm going to be really honest here, even rural schools partnerships, most rural schools partnerships come into, are kicked off with our work in schools is kicked off by referral. I actually think that it's also really important that schools do their own research about, am I actually taking on something that's going to work here, or am I taking on something that seems like it's been a good idea and a winner down at the school down the road. So we don't want to do all of our work just by looking over the fence. I think that it presents a poor lack of inquiry, and I think what that leads us to is to poor programs, not only selection but implementation. So really important that we do that. So whether your focus around moving away from punitive work is around resilience, or whether it's self-esteem or on-task behaviour or relationships or anything like that, I think that it's hugely important that you take some time and step into the research and do what you do and pick what works rather than what seems popular. Even as I mentioned before, the University of London research around bullying. If you look through the research, there's nothing in there about zero tolerance work. There's nothing in there about buddy schemes. There's nothing in the top 10 that is one of the big brand programs that have gone around the school. Yet we keep bringing in programs and hoping that we can change behaviour by teaching bystander behaviour on a Wednesday afternoon. And that needs to stop. We need to say, okay, let's look at the research about what really works. And what you find that really works is strong cultural considerations, and then it's a matter of you being able to use your intuition as a leader to look at the research and say, okay, how do I contextualise that here and make a best fit selection about the model that's going to replace the punitive one that's possibly stood in your school for a really long time. The next key consideration that you'll need to make is around motivation. And this sounds really corny, that I should suggest to a bunch of school leaders they need to think about motivation, because we tend to think about American inspirational speakers when we're talking about motivation, and that's certainly not the way that Australians are motivated. There's a fabulous book that I'd like to recommend to all of you called The Game Changer by a friend of mine called Jason Fox, and in it Jason talks to what motivates people genuinely, and I guess specifically Australian people. We're not motivated by the rah-rah of a great speaker. What we're motivated by is the presence of goals, rules and feedback. And this is actually something that if you think about young people and what they're motivated by at the moment, and the incredible explosion of online gaming, this is something that the game producers and game designers have known for some time, and I think that it's time that this information was in the hands of our school leaders and our teachers. The presence of goals, rules and feedback, if you think back to even, like I always need to use when I'm thinking about online gaming, something from my era, so that's the picture of Super Mario. If you think about the old Super Mario game, the presence of goals, rules and feedback was really specific. So the goal, rescue the princess. And the rules are don't touch anything that's lava, flaming or spiky. And the feedback you get is that if you do touch one of those three things, you'll die, and we'll take you back to a predetermined level. The wonderful part about that is that it provides something of a scoreboard, because if you do get to the end and you rescue the princess, you slide down a flagpole, you kiss the princess, and all the fireworks go off. You get a moment of celebration. You get something to congratulate people for. And we get those moments or milestones where people actually have something of a scoreboard where they go, actually, I've passed that point now. That's fantastic. And so as leaders, we need to make sure that whatever our scaffold is about changing model, that we actually look for milestones and points of achievement that we can stop and celebrate. It lets people know that we value their work, and it motivates people to take further steps. They need a scoreboard. They need to be able to see that certain parts of the work that we're doing are not just a struggle, but they have been ticked off, and that we can feel really motivated to tackle the next part once we have ticked it off and changed something really, really fundamental. The next one is the whole notion that when it comes to training people to move model, we will need to do it far more than once. So the whole concept that you could bring someone in to run a workshop for your people around bullying, or you could bring a resilient speaker into the school, or you could bring a speaker in to speak to the Year 12s about motivation as coming in to study really hard as they head into their exams, is reasonably flawed. And the reason for it is that we're not asking them to implement a program here. We're asking them to change something that they started learning about when they were about 18 months old. That we started learning about the adversarial approach when we were very, very young. And so sheep dipping people in one training opportunity just won't cut it. So what we need to do is to, and I guess, look, it's a little bit like saying that we're going to try and get fit by going to the gym once. It just won't do the job. It's only the repeated stuff that we go back. We bring in many of the schools we work with, doing some monthly mentoring where, twice a term they get together and mentor each other around how they're implementing this shift. And it's very discussional. So as leaders, we need to look for how we're going to structure for informal discussion opportunities to be a regularity. We need to provide readings for our people that support the things that they're starting to think and starting to try. We need to use our online discussion platforms as triggers to get even uncomfortable or difficult or somewhat difficult to read conversations happening in those places. We need to make sure that we allocate regular spots in our staff meetings so that the staff meetings are not so just so operational, but they're also opportunities to continue to revisit the notion of what it is that we're really trying to change here, and that's moving away from punishment. So we're going to need to find many, many ways, probably I would suggest to you over around a 2 or 3 year period, to get the mind changes rather than just the strategy changes that we're looking for. The next one, I guess, is an extension, or I guess a magnifying of one of those key points from the previous slide about training, and that is that any training, I believe, can be measured by the quality and depth of the conversations it triggers. So for me, if you go to a day of training and you go home and you don't really want to talk to anyone about it, but it was quite interesting, then I say that training's failed. So training's fantastic, but we need to obsess over the quality of the professional dialogue that happens post-training. So as leaders, that means a structure. It means using traditional training platforms in a way that actually, I guess, if you think about your old Bloom's taxonomy, the traditional training platforms tend to step in at the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It's really about making sure that you learn something and then at some stage you might regurgitate it or you perhaps even try it. But conversation allows us to step up to those higher aspects of Bloom's taxonomy, and things like, we get people to talk. They're evaluating the worth of projects, they're contextualising the key thinking, they're analysing, they're designing, they're creating. And they're the things that we're looking for. And to be honest, it's only that level of sophisticated thinking that promotes a transference in our brains from long-term memory, from short-term memory into long-term memory. And it's only when we're actually getting a long-term memory change here that we could trust that there'll be any sort of genuine change in practice. So we want to obsess as leaders over how many opportunities we can create for people to immerse themselves in dialogue about the new models that we're taking them forward through. And I think that the last critical consideration before I do a little a wraparound on change management in schools, the last one that I wanted to pay attention to is that the fact that when we are moving away from punishment doesn't mean that we will never punish another student. And what we're saying, though, is we're not going to have punishment as our primary model. What we would like to do is to have punishment fit in the way that punishment works within another model, not without it, but within it. And so if you look, for example, at the restorative model and say, okay, one of the mistakes that schools make with the restorative model is they go, rightio, restorative, 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 but now this is really bad, I'm going punitive. And at any time in that journey, a student is only getting access to one model. It's restorative or it's punitive. Now, the best use of punitive measures are when they are meaningful and relevant, and the best way to make them meaningful and relevant is to make them known in advance, and the best way to make them well established and known in advance is to negotiate them with students. So if we can see behaviour patterns emerging with our, who we might refer to as our frequent flyers or our repeat offenders, then what we need to do is to make sure that one of the best punishments you can apply here is to apply time. So we might say to them, you know, what should happen if you hurt someone again? And we're going to lead them in the discussion to say something like, I'll probably get internally suspended, or I'll miss a couple of lunch times, or something like that. And we're going to use that time to then hit them. What I would certainly do as a school leader, if I had somebody internally suspended working in or next to my office, is during that whole time that they're being punished, I will hit them with as many restorative questions as I possibly can. And so we get this double dip effect. So punishment and consequences can work, and they can support behaviour change and improvement in your school, but they never work when they sit outside of the model, or when they actually are the driver of the model. If we can take a restorative model where we're going to use the restorative questioning to build restorative thinking in our students, then we can use punishment and consequences for our repeat offenders to buy us the time to give them the extra help that they need. And the truth is, that's what's going on here. They need extra help in moving forward. Okay, so they're my 5 critical considerations. I want to finish the webinar today, and I'm not about to wrap up on you in the next couple of minutes, but what I want to do is to take you through some key principles that are worth thinking about when we're looking to change. This is the way that schools change. There are 3 levels or 3 domains of principles around change that I want you to pay attention to as you move forward here. The first one here around leadership principles, and the top one there around communicate the mission goes back to that whole idea of selling the vision. What we also need to do is to not come from that deficit base, which means that we need to identify the solid base from change. The point at the bottom around leading from the front means that we need to walk the talk. So there is no point saying we want people to use restorative questions, but when things get really pointy in our school, losing our minds and getting punitive, we need to be the ones that first check in on ourselves and make sure that people are seeing us and hearing us implement the very change that we wish them to implement first. And then the last one here is an incredibly, a really amazing section, point that I get out of looking at the work of people like the amazing Shigata Mitra, who instituted the hole in the wall experiment in the slums of India. And what he said was, sometimes we need to create the conditions for change and encourage people to do something amazing with it. I certainly remember when, as a principal of a brand new school, we got the keys to the school 48 hours before the students arrived. We certainly didn't give, as a primary school, didn't give my early childhood teachers much of an opportunity to set up their learning environment. But they said, what do we do? What do we do? And I said, look, we're going to implement restorative practices. We're also going to implement coding, cooperative learning. We're also going to work from a really strong evidence base in the way that we work. And by the way, it's a co-teaching environment, so you'll need to make sure that you're putting 50 kids in this room, 2 teachers combining effectively. Off you go. And I certainly had in mind what it might look like, but what they created was extraordinary. And to this day, I can remember walking into that classroom on the first morning with 50 prep students arriving into a room that 2 days before had been blank, and being astonished at what these people had created. Sometimes if we control the change management process too much, we reduce and remove the opportunity for people to be creative. And that's what it means that part of that role is going to be to facilitate what we call emergent phenomena, the stuff that comes out of nowhere that is just incredible, and we need to acknowledge it and honour it and provide it the opportunity to exist. The second set of change management principles that I want us to pay attention to as we move forward through this particular change are operational. So they're about the work at your local school. So those 4 points are, first of all, I guess at the top, is to look first up for policy and practice discrepancies, where we leave ourselves incredibly open to criticism when policy doesn't match practice. So if we are going to say that we've got this approach to bullying, or we are using positive behaviour practices, or we're a restorative school, and then things in the classroom or in the playground are distinctly unrestorative, then we are going to find it very difficult to justify. So the first thing we need to do as leaders is to say operationally, where's the gaps? Where are the gaps in between our policy and our practice? Second thing is to make sure that we acknowledge the climate or culture contribution, which is a bit of just reminding ourselves that just because a program worked down the road doesn't mean it'll work in our culture. So if we can stop for a second and say, okay, what is our culture? How fertile is the soil in which we are planning to plant this crop? And what could be the potential? It's a great predictive little meme here, is to think about, what are the chances of this thriving, and what might be wrong with the soil before I plant it. Next is the bottom-up change opportunities we need to generate, which means around the implementation of a new model, I want you to give some really strong consideration to letting this not be the work of your leadership team. I want you to think hard about how you can get other key stakeholders, including all the way down to graduate teachers, getting our students, our student leaders, even our parents involved in being on working parties or implementation teams. That I want you to think of really strong consideration to developing a different implementation team that is representative of all key stakeholders in the school. And the last thing I want you to do is to control expectations. There's nothing worse than being the leader, like me, who says, this is going to be educational Tahiti, isn't it awesome? Everyone says fantastic, and then 3 weeks later we're not there. Changing the entire model and changing the entire approach, and indeed, therefore, transforming the culture of your school is going to take time. So let's make sure that we control expectations. One of the best ways you can do it is to put milestones in your implementation plan that, while, like I mentioned before, give you the chance to celebrate, they also give you the opportunity to make sure that people don't get too ahead of themselves and too disappointed when the great educational Tahiti isn't reached within the first 3 or 4 weeks. And the final principles that I want you to think about when you're looking to change in your school are personal ones. In fact, I guess I want to start this one by looking over at the left here. The truth is that teams don't change, and I think we do far too much work in emphasising what teams should look like in our schools, when teams themselves are almost a nothing. They're just a collection of individuals. So it's not teams that change, it's individuals that do. So if we can think about who are the individuals who might resist most, and how, who, for instance, are our Debono black hatters, how might they like to receive this information so that I can give them individually the opportunity to change, and in turn they will actually be high influencers on their teams, then that's a valuable thing for us to do. Look for your champions. Look for your people who might accelerate and invest in them as individuals here, so that they can actually get out there and influence their teams more collectively as those individuals. To go up to the top of this model here, I want you to think very carefully about your personal influence here. Where your ability to get people to change their minds about using punishments as their default mechanism is going to be heavily dependent upon your ability to leverage relationship, which means you're going to need to build really positive relationships with people, and you're going to need to use every little bit of social capital within those relationships to get them to change their minds. When we're talking today about moving beyond punishment, we're not talking about a new strategy, we're talking about changing minds. And we need people to abandon something that they've held dear for a very long time. It's going to take the influence of a very relational leader to have them feel confident enough to step into the abyss with you on that one. If we head down the bottom, we need to identify the resistance in self and others. So we need to look for ourselves. What are the times that I actually go, what, there needs to be a punishment for this? And can I stop myself at this point? And can I say, what? Is that actually true? Does that stand up that there needs to be a punishment at this point? Or am I just identifying that there's actually some resistance in myself here for moving away from the punishment model? And also, who are the people in my school that are going to find this the most difficult? Who are the people who are going to resist this with all that they're worth? And if we have to make some decisions there about, first of all, are they the people that, we're going to need to strategize heavily to get them into a position where they won't resist the change that we're putting in place. We're going to have to sell them a very strong why. Or to be really honest, are they the people that we need to be great leaders in helping them find a different place to work? Because I certainly am not interested in a small party of powerful people being anchors on you implementing best practice in your school. And if we need to find other places for people to work, I think that's something we need to be active about. And the last little principle here is the whole concept of positive conversations. So what we need to do here, a brilliantly delivered vision at a staff meeting for moving away from one model and stepping confidently into another can completely be undone as you pour your coffee at morning tea, saying, geez, I don't know about this. This seems a little crazy to me. What do you reckon? And we'll see how we go, I suppose, but we won't hold our breath on whether this actually has a positive impact. The informal conversations that we get in around moving forward out of the punitive model are just as important as the formal ones when we present at staff meeting or when we run training opportunities or when we mentor people or when we coach them as they're moving forward. So I want us to pay really close attention to our personal influence over the conversations that are happening in our school. So the very next step now, and I've been very good today. Look, guys, to congratulate myself just a little bit there. I'm very mindful of making sure that I don't that I don't speak too long on a webinar. I know full well that you are not going to stick around longer than 60 minutes, so we've left a little bit of time today to make sure that we have to see if we have any questions. So I want to give you just a moment here to actually type a question in if you would like to, and I also want to give you the opportunity to put up your hand. And I'm also mindful now that I have not gone and checked for a little while to see if there are any hands up. So I'm going to wait just a moment to see if I get any questions today about that, or whether you would like to put up your hand. Remember that you are very, very welcome to put your hand up to ask a question out loud. I can unmute you individually. Don't worry, I'm not going to unmute absolutely everybody and hear you munching on your chips or sipping on your coffee. But I'm just looking now. I haven't got any questions yet. The good part about the question box is, guys, even over the next couple of minutes while I wrap things up today, if you do ask a question, I'll spot it there and I'll try and squeeze it in. And the other thing that I will do is I'll get the report on this today. So if you ask a question that I don't get to today, then I'll follow up with you and send you an email about it. Okay, I'll move on from question time today and make sure that you get to your work. Look, if the idea of taking on a long and permanent and sustained change process away from the punitive model into a different model of working with your people works, then you might want to consider having a chat with us about partnership. The 3 steps that our schools take in building partnerships is, first, they decide what is their improvement theme, and this is about how are we actually, if we're not going to be punishing, how are we actually stepping into something that exists rather than just taking away the punishment aspect from people. That can be geared around the culture of your school and helping the leaders in that space if you found the type of work that we're talking about today valuable. It can be around behaviour and specifically how we bring fantastic practice into the learning environment, and it can be around that theme that I've mentioned a few times today, to the 58% of people who are looking for an alternative to the punitive model. I want to advocate really strongly the restorative method, and if you are interested in using restorative practices, we can walk forward with you around that. You then choose your partnership term, which means that you make decisions about whether we're going to work together for 12 months, 24 months, or 36 months. I'm delighted that 80% of our schools who are in partnership are working with us in partnership over 36 months, because they acknowledge that that's how long it takes. And then we get to work. So we provide training, we work in the classrooms, we work with your parents, we make sure that we mentor the leaders and the implementation team, we coach your teachers, we provide all the supports that go out to our member schools, and we give you unlimited phone and email contact. So myself or our other director at Real Schools, Ryan, who is also a former successful school principal, we actually want to make sure we're wildly determined that you will not view us as workshop providers. You will view us as critical friends to your school over a 3-year journey. So we want to make sure that you get that opportunity to have us walk with you on that. If that sounds like something that you might like to have a conversation about, don't worry, you're not committing. If it sounds like something you'd like to have a conversation about, we'll make that conversation happen. I just want you to, in the question box, just whack the word partnership in there. Okay, and we'll make sure that we get to you around that. Okay, so just put the word partnership in there. We'll get in touch and make a very brief conversation happen so that you can understand more about partnership. And the other one, I guess, that might be if your school is our little no-brainer, I guess, is that we want to be able to at least provide you with some resources every month. We write an article for our teachers every month. We write an article for our leaders every month. We record a 3 to 4 minute staff meeting conversation starter for our teams every month. We run these webinars and record them every month. So and we put all of those resources in our member section. And as a member school, this is $249. As a member school for 12 months, you get full access to all of those, and we send you an email with new resources every single month. If you feel that you have the authority to sign your school up to spend $249 to access those resources over the next 12 months, then I want you to just whack the word member in the question box, and we're going to very quickly make sure that your membership is initiated and that you start getting those resources on a very regular basis. I'm mindful here also, just very quickly, that I've got a question that seems to be a little bit more of a comment from Jennifer. So Jennifer, I just want to make it just out loud here, so that I'm going to get in touch with you personally and make sure that we get a quick chat about what you've actually put in the question box there. Thank you very much for that. I want to encourage you to go and have a gawk around the Real Schools website. There's so much stuff there. There's so many options for us to start working with you to move your school forward. And the last thing I want to do is encourage to stay in touch. If there's something that you want to talk about after today, but putting something in the question box and I'm not quite sure about that, feel free to drop us an email. Send us an email to info@realschools.com.au, and we'll make that happen, or give us a call. We're on 1300 789 422. And the last thing that I want to actually tell you about today is the next webinar. Today's leadership webinar today is about assisting our leaders with the important work that you need to do moving forward, and the next one is for our teachers. And I am almost certain that at some stage you have heard your teachers complain that the educational landscape is changing too much, and that it is affecting their well-being, that there is too much to do, there is too little time, that the curriculum's too crowded. And there's a lot of complaining sometimes, I guess, about things that are beyond our control, and they're going to be there anyway. So the next webinar is how to survive and thrive in the ever-changing education landscape. It's going to be presented by our Real Schools Director, Ryan Martin, who has an incredibly successful history in being able to bring teachers on board with difficult change processes. And I want to encourage it. We're going to send in a follow-up email to you, the link to that webinar. And I want to encourage you incredibly strongly to get your teachers involved in this one. This is their Bear Grylls opportunity on how you survive when conditions are tough, and how we reduce our complaints and get on with the things that we just have to do. And let's see if we can use that opportunity let's see if we can use that momentum to allow the teachers to feel like they're more focused on the things that really matter to them. And we think if we can do that, we can get some fantastic strategic gains as well. So that's the end today, guys. Thank you so much for coming along. Really appreciate you being here. Hope that it's been of value to you. I'm going to take your lack of questions as a vote of confidence that today's webinar hit the mark for you. Again, if there is something you'd like to share about, just let us know. And we'll see you next month with our webinar on surviving and thriving in that ever-changing educational landscape. We'll see you soon, guys. Bye for now.